Welcome back everyone to this series on working with React Data Grid. Last time you saw how to create a new React application and integrate the React Data Grid into it. In this video, I will show you how to bind data to the React Data Grid from local JSON and remote data source like OData, OData version 4 and Web APIs. You will also learn how to bind data using AJAX request, Fetch API and Axios. If you recall my previous video, you may know how to bind the local JSON data to the data grid. I will recall this again now by opening the existing application that was created during my last Getting Started video. You can download this Getting Started sample from the link provided in the below description, or you can also listen to my Getting Started video from the mentioned link. I have created a new JSON file under the src folder and defined the JSON array. I imported this JSON array in the app.tsx file and populated it in the data grid by binding it with the props data source. To display only the selective columns in the grid, I declared the columns directive with the customization for only the required columns. This way, you can bind the local JSON data to the data grid. But in real time, mostly you would like to generate data for your grid from a remote data source. So I will show you how to bind an external data source to the React Data Grid. To bind the remote data, you may use the data manager of Syncfusion. The data manager will act like a gateway for both local and remote data source, which will use queries to interact with the data source. Remove the import statement, which imports the data from local file datasource.json. Import the data manager from syncfusion/ej2-data. Create a constant which initializes the data manager. As each data source uses a different way of accepting request and sending back the response, you should mention the specific adapter based on the type of data source. If you are using an OData endpoint, use the OData adapter. Use OData v4 adapter for OData version 4 endpoint. OData version 4 is the improved version of OData protocol. For a Web API endpoint, use Web API adapter. For this video, I will use a sample OData version 4 endpoint. This endpoint will return an object with value array which contains the data to be bind with the grid component. Mention the adapter as OData v4 adapter in the data manager. Assign this data manager instance to the data source props of the grid component. Now the data grid is populated with the data retrieved from the OData version 4 endpoint. Here only the columns which we mentioned in the columns directive are displayed in the data grid. Okay, now let me discuss about the custom adapter. Grid component provides option to create your own custom adapter to extend the functionality of an existing adapter. You can do this by creating a custom class that inherits from the standard adapter and adding the customization options you need. In this sample, I will show you how to add the serial number column to the grid and auto-generate the serial number to each row from the custom adapter. Create a class serial number adapter and inherit from OData v4 adapter. Override the process response function of the OData v4 adapter. Add your custom logic to automatically assign the serial numbers for each row. Here I am getting the data from the parent class by calling super.processResponse function. Iterate the data and set the new serial number property with the calculated serial number using the setValue function of ej2-base. Finally, return the result and count objects. Use the created custom adapter in the data manager and add a new column directive for the serial number column in the columns directive. In the output, you can see the serial number column is displayed along with the remote data. To perform all the operations of the data grid, including CRUD operations in the client side, you may use the offline property. By enabling this, all the operations will be handled in the client side itself. In the network tab of the developer tool, you can see that no request is sent to the server. In some cases, you may need to send some additional query parameters to the server when calling the endpoint. You may achieve this by using the query property of the grid component. Import query from ej2-data, initialize the query class, and use the addParams method to add the query parameter in the request. Now in the network tab of the developer tool, you can see the query parameter is being sent in the request header. Apart from Data Manager, you can also fetch data using any Ajax library for binding data with a grid component. You may use the Ajax library Syncfusion is offering. This API is clear and simple. Remove the existing code snippet related to queries and Data Manager. Import Ajax from @syncfusion/ej2-base. You need to fetch the data from the remote source before the component is rendered. So you should fetch the data in the useEffect hook with an empty array as second argument, so that this hook will be executed before rendering the component. If you use React version less than 16.8, you may use the Ajax call in the component did mount lifecycle method of the class component. Initiate the Ajax class with a HTTP endpoint and call the send method. You will get the result through the onSuccess function, in which you can bind the data to the data source using the React state. Now, the grid is being populated with the data retrieved from the Ajax call. As a side note, you may use the native fetch API of the browser like this, or any other HTTP client like Axios like this, to get data from the remote API. Let me summarize some of the major points we discussed in this video. First, we saw how to bind local JSON data to the React data grid. Next, we learned how to bind the remote data from OData endpoint. Then we learned how to write a custom adapter to modify the data retrieved from the remote data source. Finally, we saw how to fetch data using Ajax, Fetch API, and Axios. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.